A group of friends and I planned a camping trip during spring break. We had arranged everything a week ahead. As the day got closer, the weather got worse. It was cold and gloomy, something rare for northern Georgia. When the night arrived, another cold front came with it. I was in my early 40s, but we wore plenty of warm clothes and brought along whiskey and some beers. The plan was to visit a spot my friend knew about that was only reachable by a tough 4x4 truck. We really wanted to camp somewhere quiet, away from the usual family or RV campgrounds. So we headed away from town, a place with only one traffic light and maybe a few hundred people, then drove deep into the forest. After about half an hour of rough driving over bumpy creek beds and dodging fallen trees, it began to rain. By the time we found the campsite, the rain turned into hail. The place was marked by an old dirt path a few hundred feet long, and nearby was the rusty shell of an old Ford hatchback. That night, we passed around a bottle, trying to set up our tents before we got too drunk. Eventually, we managed and got a fire going using some diesel fuel. By then, the hail had stopped. The empty whiskey bottle ended up broken in the fire, and more empties were piling up around us. We drank, played cards, and finally fell asleep in our tents. The next morning, I slowly woke up to the sound of something heavy being dragged right past my tent. It looked like a beaten-up station wagon, stripped and covered in rust, pulling the old Ford with a chain. That Ford had been there so long its floor had rotted away, and tree roots had grown around it, almost holding it to the earth. Behind the wagon, a woman was driving, a man sat next to her, and 3 shirtless kids were in the back where seats used to be. The man kept staring out the window, never looking at us. The kids had dirt smeared on their faces, which made their distant, empty gazes stand out even more. It was the kind of look you only see in pictures from places torn apart by war or in the poorest parts of cities, or in rural areas so poor that an old gas station in town feels like the edge of the world. That gas station was the only sign of civilization nearby, a place where you might expect the soundtrack from some old horror movie to play in your head. The woman spoke with a rough, whiskey and cigarette-soaked voice. She asked if we were from the city and if we came to camp. She said it was fine as long as we weren't doing any drugs. We told her we were only drinking, nothing else. She said she drank sometimes too, so that was fine. Then she mentioned how she knew we had been there because she'd seen black helicopters flying nearby. She said some men worked for her and checked the land. She laughed dryly, and her laugh was almost cruel. The man kept staring out the window, unmoved. One of the children pressed his hands on the window and looked right at us, his mouth hanging open with spit running down the grimy glass. He looked about 9 or 10 years old. She asked if we knew someone named Martha. We said no, but everyone seemed to know old Martha. She asked if we went to church. I lied and said yes, even though we didn't have much time for church. She told us we should come to her church the next day, just over a hill nearby, and that Martha would be glad to meet us all. We promised to come. After she slowly drove away, dragging that old Ford behind her, we all looked at one another and started laughing nervously. It wasn't really funny, but it was how we dealt with the uneasy feeling inside. Our instincts, though dulled by safe city life, kicked in hard. Something was off. I felt it before she even spoke. When I looked into her eyes, I knew something wasn't right. The kids, the man, her laugh. It all felt wrong. We tried hiking up that hill the next day to check out the church she talked about. From the top, you could see for miles, just endless forest, no buildings or clearings in sight. We ended up cutting the trip short and packed up to leave before noon. One evening, I was camping deep in the wilderness near where I lived. I'm not really into hiking, so I usually don't go more than a mile or 2 on any trail. This time, the distance from the campsite to the trailhead, where my car was parked, was just a little over a mile. I had spent the weekend camping by a small pond and planned to stay 2 more nights. On the 3rd day, I spent the morning walking back to my truck to grab my fishing gear and some extra food, then hiked back to camp. I figured I'd try fishing while I still had daylight. When I got back to the campsite, I noticed another tent had been set up farther down by the edge of the pond. At first, I didn't see anyone around it and didn't think much about it. But then I realized I hadn't seen anyone on the only trail leading to this part of the pond. Maybe there was another path I didn't know about. Either way, I set up my fishing rod and began fishing. About every 20 minutes, I glanced over at that tent on the shore, but through the 3 hours I fished, I never saw anyone near it. As the sun started to go down, I packed up my rod and headed back to my tent. I ate, gathered some dry branches for the campfire, and waited for the sky to darken before lighting it. Right after I lit the fire, I caught sight of a shadow moving through the trees ahead of me. They were far enough away that the firelight didn't reach them, so after that quick look, it was just dark. I guessed it was the person from the tent down by the pond, probably collecting wood for their own fire. It felt strange that as soon as I lit mine, they appeared just outside my camp, but I didn't dwell on it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the flames, the night sky, and the still water. It was peaceful, almost making me want to fall asleep right there. But about 30 minutes later, I noticed several figures emerging from the woods. As they got closer, I counted for men walking straight toward my campsite. My mind raced with thoughts, but I tried to stay calm, hoping they were just nearby campers who might need help or something. When they stepped into the light of the fire, I could see they looked serious, all in their 30s or 40s, with cold expressions. They kept walking closer. When they were just a few feet away, I stood up from my chair nervously and asked what they wanted. None of them answered and kept walking forward. 2 of them moved around behind me, going straight toward my tent, while the other 2 pushed me aside. By then, I knew what was happening, but I also knew fighting them would only make things worse. I watched as the 2 men started rifling through my things while the other 2 pushed me further away from the firelight. I tried to say something, but their eyes were empty. They didn't care at all. I kept telling myself to stay calm and let them take whatever they wanted. But the 2 men continued dragging me farther away from the campsite and the glow of the fire. After a minute, it was so dark I could barely see where we were going, and the only sound was our footsteps in the quiet woods. Then we stopped. I turned around to face them, standing there in the dark between the trees. Suddenly, all my fear hit me at once. One of them reached for something, and I immediately took off running. All I heard were my feet pounding on the leaves and grass. Even as I ran, I kept a rough sense of direction, trying to get back to the trail. When I reached it, I headed straight to my truck, and thankfully, no one followed me. I reported what happened to the police, but in the end, almost all my belongings were stolen, and there were no clues to help find out who those men were. What they intended to do by dragging me deep into the woods is pretty clear, so I consider myself very lucky to have escaped with my life. I was 15 when this happened. It was my first year hunting deer with my family. Specifically, my uncle, my cousin, and me. To give you an idea, my hunting spot was about 2 miles south of my uncle's, and his stand was roughly 9 miles southwest from our campsite. We rode an ATV about 100 yards from his stand, which left me quite a bit of walking to reach mine. I live in northern Wisconsin, where during winter it gets dark very fast and early. It was around 4 in the afternoon when I began feeling cold and decided to close my tent. I was using a .243 rifle with a camouflage pink cover and a strap so I could carry it on my back. After closing the tent's zippers, I put my trash into a bucket I brought with me. While I was throwing away some garbage, I heard a few leaves crunching nearby. I quickly looked up, hoping to see a deer, but after about a minute, I figured it was just a squirrel or a bird and felt a little let down. I zipped up my tent and started walking toward my uncle's spot. As I stepped out, I noticed a fresh trail pushing through the leaves. It was a wide path, not something a small animal or even a deer would make. My first thought was that it could be a bear or maybe a wolf, so I began walking faster toward my uncle. I started to feel anxious as it grew darker, and I was still almost a mile away. Suddenly, I froze when I heard one of the most chilling sounds I've ever heard in my life. The best way to describe it was like a mix between a bear and a man being hurt. The noise came from about 150 yards behind me, so I started to run. Running was tough with my boots, heavy hunting clothes, and the 20 pounds on my back, but fear kept me going without stopping. About 25 seconds later, I was still running when I heard that awful sound again. This time it was louder and much closer. By now, it was completely dark, with only the moon lighting my path. I turned my headlamp around, and what I saw is still the most frightening thing I've ever faced. About 50 yards away, a black figure stood in the moonlight. It was tall, maybe 10 feet, and very thin. Without thinking twice, I sprinted off, struggling to get my rifle off my back as I ran. I didn't know exactly where I was heading, but I just kept running. Eventually, I found myself on a road I recognized, Rabbit Lane, the road that links our camp to the hunting area entrance. I ran along the road until I reached my campsite. When I saw the cabin, I looked back and saw that figure again, this time further away. It was still standing upright, a tall, skinny black shape. It had very long arms and legs. When I got to the cabin steps, I threw up from exhaustion and kept vomiting for about a minute before finally passing out. I woke up to the sound of my uncle's ATV coming into the driveway. I started crying as I ran to him and hugged him tightly. I quickly told him everything that happened and how I ran back without stopping. At first, he didn't believe me, but as we settled inside, I could see his face change when he looked into my desperate eyes. I didn't sleep that night or for many nights after. People have said it was probably just a bear or that I imagined things, but I know what I saw. I'm older now, and I only hunt with someone else. I also carry a bigger gun because it makes me feel safer, knowing I can defend myself if needed. Writing this now, I still think it was the scariest moment of my life. It was autumn of 1987. I was 25 years old. I had never really felt scared out in the woods before. Honestly, I always thought the forest was my safe spot, a place where I could unwind and escape from life's worries. I never saw a Bigfoot, skinwalker, or any kind of monster out there. Working as a utility worker for a small town in eastern Tennessee, I'd seen my share of wild situations. Since I worked for a small municipal utility, we had to do a lot of different jobs, including shutting off service when needed. That part wasn't fun, but it came with the territory. I'd seen crazy things, but never while in the woods. My main hobbies were hunting and fishing. Back then, it was pretty easy to find good hunting spots just by asking the landowners. Most were happy to have the deer population controlled because the animals were damaging young cornfields. This area was old mining country, and years of strip mining left a lot of land unusable for farming or building. So much of it was open for hunting. It was October 1987. Daylight saving time wasn't observed yet, so it stayed light out until just after 7:30 p.m. I left work at 4 and hurried home to change into my camo gear. Bow season in Tennessee was my favorite time of year. I planned to hunt in a spot that meant a lot to me, in a remote area we'll call Pine Ridge. This place was a mix of broken farmland and thick woods. After parking, I decided not to unload my four-wheeler and just walk the 3/4 of a mile to my hunting spot. I was carrying my summit climbing stand, my bow, and a small bag with a knife and flashlight. I had to walk around the edge of a cornfield. The corn hadn't been harvested yet. I stuck to the path the farmer left for his equipment to reach the top of the field. The field was shaped like a rectangle, and the upper end sat much higher on a hill. The lower end ran down to a creek about shin deep where you could enter the field. At the top right corner of the field was the entry point into the woods. This was the highest spot in the field. I had to push my way through a thick blackberry patch, but finally found a game trail leading into a hillside full of tall trees. After picking a good tree for my climbing stand, setting it up and climbing about 18 feet high, I got ready to hunt. I love watching the forest and its creatures. Hunting was just an excuse to spend time in the woods. As a utility worker, I wasn't scared of heights, so I climbed as high as I could to get a better view. Around 5:15 p.m., I settled in, arrow ready. I usually approach my permanent stand slowly to avoid spooking deer nearby. I also added reflective tape along the trail to find my way back in the dark. But this time, I was using my climbing stand in an unfamiliar part of the woods. As I prepared to come down, I heard footsteps. I waited, thinking it might be a deer moving through the brush, but I never got a clear look. It was about 8 p.m., with a nearly full moon giving me enough light to see well from my perch. I figured I could still shoot up to 15 yards, but the shooting hours were over, so I began my descent. As I carefully climbed down, I heard loud crashing sounds, probably a deer startled by my movement. Once on the ground, I quickly packed up my stand and bow, then shone my flashlight in the direction I had come. The woods looked different at night, dark and strange when the flashlight beam hits dense undergrowth. I walked along the edge of the blackberry patch trying to find my trail but couldn't locate it. Almost 9 p.m. now, I just wanted to get out. I started picking my way through the thick bushes, keeping the moonlight to my right. Finally, I emerged back into the field about 20 yards from where I had entered. Standing there, pulling thorns from my clothes and skin, I thought the weird night was over. Then I noticed something. When I had come in, I walked along the left side of the field for about 150 yards, turned right, and walked another 80 yards to where I was hunting. That high spot gave me a good view of the field's edges. When I arrived, there was no sign of any vehicles or noises from equipment or ATVs, so I was shocked to see something in the trail, something big. It looked about 6 feet tall and just stood there, blocking the only path out. I didn't hesitate and started walking toward it, hoping it was just a trick of the light. But it wasn't. I grabbed an arrow from my quiver, remembering my knife was back in my four-wheeler. I walked fast, not stopping once. Even 100 yards away, it didn't move or make a sound. I kept walking loudly straight toward it for about 200 yards, thinking, it's really here, blocking my only way out. As I got closer, I could see it was 2 people standing side by side. That made me even more uneasy. It was 9:15 p.m., about 45 degrees out. Nobody should be out here now. I kept walking. Now 20 yards away, I could tell it was a man and woman, both maybe in their early 20s. 10 yards away, I was moving toward them but heard no sound. They just stood there. When I reached them, I half expected them to attack me, but they never moved. I said quietly, "Cold out here, huh?" Still no response or movement. I kept going, keeping an eye on them. I thought, okay, this is it. But they never looked back or even moved their heads. Across the creek and another 100 yards later, I finally reached my truck. I felt uneasy approaching it because it was so quiet. I thought someone might be waiting to jump me, so I crept up slowly and watched for a few minutes. The truck seemed fine, so I got in. As I drove away, I wondered how those 2 people got here since I hadn't seen another car. I tried to forget the whole thing, but the next day at work, during lunch, I went out to get food and found all 4 tires on my truck were flat. Looking closer, I saw each tire had about a dozen roofing nails stuck in it. I had to put in tubes just to make it home. Someone definitely did this while my truck was parked out there. After that night, I always felt like someone was watching me when I hunted in that area. That's why I stopped going alone and never parked off the main gravel road again. I never learned who those 2 young people were or who slashed my tires. Foreign. Back when I was in university, I used to go camping a lot with some friends. But after we graduated, it became tough to coordinate since everyone had different schedules. So I ended up going camping alone. There was this campground we often visited, so I chose to return there. It was kind of remote and not very easy to reach, but that was exactly why I liked it. It was usually empty because most people preferred closer, more convenient spots. Knowing the trail well, I reached the site without any trouble and set up my gear. Not too long after, a man arrived. He looked like a typical hiker but only carried a small backpack, no tent or camping equipment. The strange part was that this wasn't a particularly scenic place. It was a decent campsite because it was an open clearing surrounded by trees, but if someone wasn't camping, there was no real reason to hike out that far. I didn't think much of it at the time since the man seemed normal enough. Maybe he just wanted some peace and quiet. I stayed near my tent while he kept to the opposite side of the campground. Around 6 in the evening, I stepped away from my tent to prepare dinner, and that's when I saw the man finally leave. It struck me as odd since it would be fully dark in under an hour, and the hike back was at least 3 hours. Other than that, I was just glad to have the place to myself. I boiled water on my small stove and heated up one of my freeze-dried meals. After eating, I returned to my tent and sat down outside. The sun was almost gone, so I took out a little lantern and hung it on my tent's side. I stayed there, soaking in the quiet. Suddenly, it dawned on me that I was completely alone, and usually at this time, we'd all gather around a campfire chatting. Alone, I didn't really have much to do. After some time, I switched off the lantern and crawled inside my tent, lying down to sleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up hearing footsteps nearby. When I opened my eyes, it was pitch dark, and I had no clue how long I'd been asleep. The footsteps came closer and closer until they stopped on the far end of the campground. After a few seconds, I found my lantern and turned it on, then unzipped the tent to look outside. About 20 feet from where I was, I saw the shadow of a man standing where I had seen the stranger before. From what I could tell, it was likely the same person, but he just stood there motionless. It was late enough that this felt really unsettling no matter how you looked at it. Since I turned the lantern on, he definitely noticed me. I called out, "Hey, are you okay?" I waited a few seconds but got no response. I couldn't tell which way he was facing. It was either turned away or staring directly at me. And honestly, both options freaked me out. I reached into my backpack for my pocket knife, then did the only thing I could think of. Stayed sitting there, waiting. Those 15 minutes were some of the most nerve-wracking of my life, watching this man barely move. Then suddenly he turned and walked away in the direction he'd come from. From his movements when he turned, I knew he had been facing me the entire time, just staring. Chills ran down my spine as his footsteps faded into the distance. I didn't know what else to do but stay awake, just in case he came back. As far as I know, he never did. I left the next morning and got home safely, but I haven't gone camping since then. I still don't know what that man was doing out there, but nothing about it was normal. Maybe me waking up and watching him scared him off, but that thought terrifies me even more. What if I hadn't woken up? It was a Saturday night, and I was coming back from school. I was 14 years old and really eager to go hunting. Hunting is something I really enjoy, especially at the ranch we visit near Lubbock, Texas. I've been going there since I was 5, and I have so many memories from that place. It's usually my grandpa, my dad, and me going. This time, a few others would come too, including some of the ranch owner's family. We had everything packed and were ready to leave. It was deer season, which is my favorite time of year. There's nothing like the feeling of spotting a big deer right in front of you. It's amazing. And, of course, taking the shot. Some people say it's wrong to hunt animals, but I think it's okay if you actually use the meat. We arrived at the ranch around 9:30 at night, so it was already pretty dark. The ranch covers about 350 acres, I think, and the campsite has a small old cabin, about the size of a regular bedroom. It has electricity, but it's not a big place like many hunters' cabins. There are small beds inside, but once when I was younger, my dad found a giant snake skin in one of the beds. Ever since then, we've preferred to sleep in a tent. The camp is surrounded by trees with a small clearing ahead, about the size of a soccer field. We usually hunt doves there. After we unloaded, we sat around the campfire talking and joking. Then suddenly we heard a scream. It was the most terrifying noise I had ever heard. It sounded almost like a mix between a human and some kind of animal. The scream came from not far away. Everyone jumped up and looked at each other. Every grown man there looked scared. I could see it in their eyes. The ranch owner was the first to ask what that was. He sent one of his family members and himself to check it out. He's an older man, probably in his late 70s. That's why the rest of us went out to search, riding my grandpa's ATV. We quickly drove around the edge of the ranch but didn't find a thing. I was still shaken up and scared to go into the blind alone. Any hunter knows you have to wake up before sunrise and get into your blind quietly so the deer don't see you. I slept in the tent with my rifle right next to me. When the alarm went off, I got ready, still nervous about being alone in the dark. Even though it was only a couple of hours before dawn, the scream kept ringing in my head. My grandpa dropped me off at the blind with the ATV and left. My dad was already at his spot. My grandpa isn't a soft man. He expects you to manage on your own. True to his style, he just left me there in the dark, expecting me to find my way. I climbed the ladder and felt my way into the blind. I waited for the sun to start coming up. After about 20 minutes, it was still pretty dark. Then I noticed something in the middle of the trail. I couldn't see it clearly, so I decided to use a night vision scope my uncle had given me. I was excited, thinking it would be a big deer. But what I saw still haunts me to this day. I don't care if you believe me or not. I expected a deer, but instead, I saw a figure walking toward the woods. It looked strange and distorted but had a human shape. Somehow, it noticed me and turned to face me. The night vision wasn't very clear, so I couldn't make out the face, but I could tell it was staring right at me. Then it gave the same awful, blood-curdling scream from the night before, only louder. The fear I felt then is impossible to put into words. I managed to snap out of my shock, grabbed my .22 rifle, and fired all the bullets into where it was standing. I was still terrified, so I grabbed my other rifle, a .243, and emptied those rounds into the same spot. When I checked through the night vision again, it was gone. After that, my phone blew up with messages and calls, mostly from my dad. I told him what happened, and he said he heard the scream too, along with my grandpa. I still go back to the ranch to hunt, but it's never been the same peaceful trip. Now I always hunt with my dad because I'm scared that thing might come back. I don't know what it was, but it somehow survived 25 rounds from a .22 and 4 shots from a .243. When we went to check later, there was no blood or footprints anywhere. I know it was dark when I shot, but at least one bullet had to hit it, right? At least once every year during hunting season, I try to make a trip up to Vermont and rent a small cabin to go hunting. I've never owned a place there because it doesn't really make sense for me financially to buy something just for one trip a year. Renting for a weekend is more practical. Plus, I'm not a pro hunter yet. I'm still gaining experience. Some years I'd go with my cousin, but lately he hasn't been feeling well, so he can't come anymore. So recently, I've been going on my own. Last season, which was in 2023 when I'm writing this now, was the last time I went hunting. It was late October. The cabin I rented was close to a state forest. I arrived late Friday evening because I had to get off work, pack, and then drive there. When I reached the long dirt road leading to the cabin, it was completely dark and utterly quiet. Around this time of year, there aren't many insects, so the nights are silent and black, especially in such a remote place. I parked near the cabin, and the owner told me the key would be under the doormat. Sure enough, it was right there. I took my 2 bags inside and unpacked my gear on the bed in the small 1-bedroom cabin. It was very cozy, and the owner had already warmed the place up for me, which was nice because Vermont gets pretty chilly in October. There was cable TV and Wi-Fi, so I set an alarm to wake up early at dawn, which I think is the best time to spot deer or maybe even a moose if you're lucky. The next morning, I woke up as soon as my alarm rang and was in the woods within 30 minutes. Since I wasn't familiar with the area, I settled behind a fallen tree that had been knocked over by the wind. Usually, from this point, it's just a waiting game, but then I heard a man's voice behind me, which startled me badly. I turned around to see a man with graying hair, though he looked to be in his late 40s. He walked toward me slowly and said, in a harsh tone, "What are you doing here?" I told him I was hunting, but he said hunting wasn't allowed there. I hadn't known that. He then said he had been watching me from up there and told me I should leave the way I came. This really freaked me out. I asked what he meant by watching me, and he said people like me, outsiders, often come up to that cabin for bad reasons. I apologized and told him I'd leave. I packed my things and started walking back, but when I glanced back, he had disappeared. I returned to the cabin, grabbed my car, and drove to another park that I'd seen on a website that allowed hunting. I waited there but didn't see anything all morning. Around noon, I went back to the cabin to rest and eat. When I got there, I found the door unlocked. I was sure I had locked it before leaving. Inside, I noticed some things were moved, and the zipper on one of my bags was open. Usually, I keep my bags zipped up, so this worried me. I quickly checked all the rooms before settling down. I was really hungry, so I drove to a nearby town and picked up some Chinese food. Then I returned to the cabin to eat and planned to go back to the park around sunset. After eating, I took a short nap, then headed back to the park. I walked slowly for about a mile but didn't see anything. My cousin always told me spotting a deer or moose can take anywhere from minutes to days. It depends on the animals and luck. Unfortunately, luck wasn't on my side that day. As darkness approached, I packed up and drove back to the cabin. I cooked some pasta with meatballs I'd brought for dinner and watched an old black and white movie while eating on the small couch. As I sat there, I thought again about the unlocked door and the moved things. I wasn't sure if it was just in my head, but it bothered me. Later, I brushed my teeth and went to the bedroom to watch another movie before sleeping. I was almost asleep, drifting between waking and dreaming, when I suddenly heard the sound of a door opening. It woke me immediately. I looked up groggily and saw the closet door in the room was slightly open. That instantly made me fully awake. The door being unlocked and things moved earlier didn't seem like a coincidence anymore. I waited a moment, then got out of bed, grabbed my hunting pistol, and turned on the light. I pointed the gun at the closet door and shouted, "Come out now, or I'll shoot." Part of me thought maybe I was just being paranoid, but when the door slowly pushed open, I was shocked. The same man from earlier stepped out, his angry face turning into a crooked smile missing a tooth. He said, "You caught me." I told him not to move and grabbed my phone to call the police. Luckily, I had a signal in the cabin. I told the dispatcher I was armed and had an intruder in the cabin. The wait for the deputies felt endless. During that time, the man kept complaining about people like me disrespecting the parks. I didn't answer him, just told him to be quiet. When the police arrived, it was clear he was arrested for breaking and entering, and possibly theft, though I don't think he took anything. He claimed the door was unlocked, but I'm not sure if that was true or if he'd picked a lock or climbed through a window. The cabin owner said there were no extra keys and insisted I must have left the door unlocked, but I don't think I did. Thankfully, I had my gun with me on this hunting trip to quickly stop the threat. The story I'm about to share is a bit long, but I'll try to keep it as short as possible so it doesn't drag. Back in the autumn of 2020, I was going through a really tough time. I was deeply depressed and stuck in a dark place. So, a buddy of mine invited me to go camping with him in the Sam Houston National Forest. I was glad to accept. We planned to stay for 2 nights at the Lake Livingston campgrounds and then spend the 3rd night camping for free somewhere along the forest roads scattered throughout the park. The first couple of days went really well. I loved the scent of pine trees, especially in East Texas, and the campsite was beautiful with the lake right there. We kayaked, hiked, and the scenery really lifted my spirits. It was exactly what I needed. But on the 3rd morning, my friend got an emergency call and had to leave suddenly. I was a bit disappointed but figured that didn't mean I had to quit too. So I stuck to our original plan and decided to find a campsite deep inside the forest on my own. After he left, I went to the nearest ranger station and grabbed a map. It showed the highways and dirt roads in the forest. I picked a few forest roads from the map and started driving out. About 5 miles from town, I found a dirt road marked with a numbered sign. I turned down it and prepared for my solo adventure. The road was wide enough for 1 vehicle, but it would have been tough if 2 trucks met. I kept the map on my lap, tracing the route with my finger while watching the road ahead carefully to avoid potholes. The trees grew thicker and darker around me, almost like they were closing in on my truck. I don't know how far I'd gone before I reached my first turn, but I was definitely deep in the woods by then. I drove to where a cluster of campsites was supposed to be, a small loop road. When I turned in, I was surprised to see a few trucks and RVs parked, with people outside cleaning hunting rifles or preparing deer. It was hunting season, so that wasn't unexpected, but the looks they gave me felt off. I just kept driving around the loop and moved on. A few more miles down the road, I found a remote spot at the edge of the forest. I pulled over, set up my tent and a fire, and poured myself some whiskey. That night wasn't great. I burned some letters I'd brought, drank more than I planned, ate, put out the fire, then retreated to my tent to play some Switch and relax. I fell asleep pretty quickly and slept hard. Around 1 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps circling my campsite. I'm an experienced camper, so I thought it was probably some animal curious about the human in its territory. I was starting to drift back to sleep when I heard a low cough. I snapped fully awake and just lay there listening. The footsteps got closer to my truck. I had locked it, but then I heard someone quietly trying the door handle, moving over to try the other side. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped the tent slowly, and shone the light toward the noise. I caught a quick glimpse of someone in full camouflage running away without any light. They just vanished into the woods. I wasn't about to chase them, but I scanned the brush with my light and saw nothing. I turned off the flashlight to see if maybe they had a phone or flashlight, but instead I heard loud crashing in the brush. The noise faded into the distance, getting quieter and quieter. Whoever that was, they ran into the pitch-black woods without any light, and in all that camo, they definitely weren't near any roads or facilities. Maybe they were on private land? I'm not sure. I was scared. I packed up my tent quickly, stuffed it into my back seat, and sped down the forest roads like I had never done before. When I reached the main road, I drove 4 hours straight back home. I want to go back someday, but with some friends and maybe a gun this time. That night was one of the scariest experiences I've ever had in the woods. What I'm about to share is the most traumatic moment in both my life and my ex-girlfriend's. I'm writing this on my own, but I had to get her okay before sending it out, especially since it's meant to be shared publicly. Her main rule was that I have to be completely honest about everything that happened, and whoever reads it needs to be respectful. I'd really appreciate it if you could respect that. It would save me a lot of trouble. So, with all that said, here goes. Back in 2013, my then-girlfriend, Emily, not her real name, and I decided to go for a day hike in northern Oregon's Willow Creek Valley. Willow Creek Valley lies alongside the Rogue River near Highway 138, surrounded by the Cascade Mountains. To the north, you have the foothills of Eagle Peak, and to the south, the Umpqua National Forest. The valley is home to maybe a couple hundred people at most, with houses and cabins scattered along creeks and roads, some of which you can only get to by long, winding dirt trails off the main highways. One thing about Willow Creek Valley I wish I had known before going is that it has a history tied to a group called the Free Republic of Cascadia. From what I understand, the movement began when some local miners struck gold and wanted to break off from Oregon to form their own state so they could avoid paying state taxes. At first, it sounds harmless enough. I mean, the country was founded on the idea of no taxation without representation. But after the Civil War, the valley attracted all sorts of people obsessed with rebellion and living outside the law, and not the harmless kind. Though those original rebels had long since died off by the 1930s, the valley still kept a reputation as a place where outsiders, fugitives, and lawbreakers hid out. And as I would find out firsthand, that reputation wasn't just talk. Emily and I arrived early in the afternoon. After grabbing a quick bite, we started hiking a loop trail that was supposed to take us near Hawk Mountain and Black Butte, then circle back down to the small town. At first, it was everything we wanted. A perfect afternoon, with fresh air smelling of pine, and us both excited about finding a new, healthy pastime. It was also nice to have some real time to talk since we both worked full-time jobs and it was getting harder to find time together. Around 4 p.m., we were breathing hard climbing a gentle hill, still having fun but definitely feeling the strain, when we stumbled onto something unexpected. There were small side trails here and there. Sometimes we'd explore them, sometimes not. This time we followed one for about 100 yards before finding a small, old log cabin tucked in a clearing, partly hidden by thick bushes. It looked charming and almost like something out of a postcard, if not for the beat-up pickup truck parked carelessly in front, with the driver's side door and the cabin's door both wide open. As we got closer, a man came out at a fast pace. He looked average build, maybe in his late 30s. When he saw us, he smiled and waved, saying, "Morning, folks, you're pretty far off the main trail." Huh? He seemed friendly enough, but his eyes kept flicking over us in a way that felt off. I said we were just out for a hike, trying to keep the mood light, and we chatted briefly about the nice weather. When I said something like, "Nice chatting, but we better get going," he asked if we wanted to come inside for some coffee. We politely said no, explaining we had a schedule and didn't want to get stuck driving home after dark. But he didn't take no for an answer. Walking closer, he kept insisting, come on now, it's no trouble. Not every day you get visitors out here, and you two look like you could use a break. His tone shifted suddenly from friendly to desperate, and the atmosphere changed. I looked at Emily and saw the same unease in her eyes. Holding hands, we started backing away slowly. But before we'd gone far, the man pulled a gun from behind his back and shouted, "Get inside, now!" We froze, terrified. When he pointed the gun at us, it was clear we had no choice but to obey. We walked toward the cabin, him keeping the weapon trained on us. Near the door, he yelled, "Hurry up! They'll be here any minute." After locking the door behind us, Emily asked who they were, her voice shaking. He ignored her and pushed us into a corner, ordering us to sit on the floor. I tried to be brave and asked again who he meant, but before I could get an answer, he hit me hard in the face with the butt of the gun. Emily screamed, and he snapped at her to be quiet. Blood ran down my cheek and burned where it hit. Emily asked if she could help stop the bleeding. He just laughed bitterly and said, "What's the point? We're all gonna die here anyway. Let it bleed." She tried not to show how scared she was, but I could see it in her eyes, and it broke my heart. He went back to the window, watching outside but turning around angrily whenever we moved or whispered. Minutes dragged on like hours. I kept telling Emily we'd be okay while scanning the room for any way out, weapons, exits, anything. But there was just one door in and one door out, and if he caught me trying to fight him, he'd shoot me without hesitation. It became a battle to stay calm. Every time he turned with the gun pointed at us, I thought that was the end. But instead of shooting, he'd just tell us to shut up because he couldn't think straight with us whispering. After maybe an hour, we guessed that they meant the police when we heard the faint sound of helicopter blades. The man got tense and muttered, "They're coming." Usually, cops would mean safety, but this time it just made everything worse. When the helicopter got closer and we heard vehicles pulling up, the man told us, "If they get in here, you're dead. You better help me make sure that doesn't happen." We agreed out of fear, knowing this might be our only chance to survive. The helicopter hovered just above us, and we soon heard shouted commands as a SWAT team exited their vehicles. The man rushed to the window, yelling, "I have hostages. Don't come any closer or they're dead." Someone answered through a loudspeaker, telling him to surrender with his hands up. Instead, the man dragged Emily to the window, screaming for her to show her face so the police could see it before he blew it off. She screamed and cried, the gun pressed to her face, and all I could do was whisper that everything would be okay. He kept yelling threats, and when the cops seemed to back off, he laughed and shouted, "That's right, back off." Then he pulled Emily back and backed away, pointing the gun at us, saying we'd be his human shields. Suddenly, noise outside interrupted him, and he ran back to the window, firing at the cops. Bullets hit near the window, and he turned to me, ordering me to kneel in the middle of the room with my hands behind my back. I hated obeying, but I knew I had no choice. I told Emily I loved her and tried to prepare for what was coming. Kneeling there with the gun pressed to my head, he warned loudly, "If anyone comes in here, I'll kill him." I realized then the cops must be right outside the door, and those moments before they broke in would be the last of my life. It sounds strange, but I focused on not wetting myself in front of Emily before dying, something I still find odd to this day. Then came the shouting and the gunshots. I fell forward, ears ringing. Sure, I was dead, but I wasn't. Took me a moment to realize it. The man lay on the floor, struggling to breathe, bleeding from the SWAT team's bullets. I just stared at him, watching him slowly die, the reality of the situation hitting me hard. One of the officers asked if I was okay, but I was so focused on the man dying that I didn't even respond at first. Aside from the cut on my face, neither Emily nor I were hurt. The SWAT team cleared the area, took our statements, and then we were free to leave. Took me a while before I could drive again. I stayed in the driver's seat for a while, comforting Emily as she cried softly and sometimes broke down in ugly sobs. I cried too, from trauma, but mostly relief. We both knew we'd carry that day with us forever. When we finally hit the road, we didn't stop until we reached Eugene. I stayed at her apartment that night, wrapped in blankets, numb from the whole surreal experience. We stayed together for a few more years, breaking up peacefully in 2016. Although we lived in different cities, we kept in touch, catching up occasionally via video calls. We often ended up talking about that day in Willow Creek Valley. Not because I brought it up, but because it naturally came up in conversation. I never tried therapy, but Emily did. She told me that talking to someone who truly understands is far better than talking to someone with a bunch of certificates on their wall who wasn't there to see or feel what happened. When I was a kid and into my early teens, I lived in a pretty unusual place deep in the woods. I'm not sure if what we saw was some kind of spirit or maybe something else entirely. I really hope someone can help me understand what happened to me and my friend that night. I'm a girl and I was about 11 years old at the time. One of my closest friends, let's call him Jake, was around 9. Jake's dad had recently bought a big piece of forest land about 60 miles away from the town we lived in the United States. When Jake's family got the land, they cleared a small spot to build their house, but the rest was pure, untouched forest. Their property was split in half by a dirt path. If you followed the road for a few miles, it would lead to some other houses. The forest looked very different depending on which side of the road you were on. On the right side, where their house was, the forest was bright and open. It didn't feel too thick and had gentle hills, just a really nice place to hang out. But the left side was a totally different story. There was a deep ditch, maybe 6 feet down, and then a very steep hill covered with old moss and plants. The trees there were tall and dark, mostly pines with almost black trunks. There was no light, no smaller plants, nothing lively at all. Climbing that hill felt strange. The forest gave off a creepy, heavy feeling, like something was watching us. It was almost like a warning instinct telling us to get out of there quickly. Jake and I jokingly called that side the Witch's Woods. One weekend in late 2003, my family came to visit Jake's family. While the adults talked, Jake and I decided to explore the forest a bit. Jake's dad warned us about a wild animal that had been digging through their garbage and causing trouble. He said it was probably a stray dog, maybe a big, scary breed like a Doberman. He told us not to try to get close because it looked sick, with patches of fur missing and a weird, unhealthy look about it. It was fall, and the trees were glowing with bright orange and red leaves. The air was calm, grayish, and still, no wind at all. Jake and I walked along the dirt road. The bright side of the forest was on our right, the Witch's Woods on our left. We talked as we walked uphill, but the left side kept making me feel uneasy, even though we were trying to be brave. Far from their house now and out of sight, I noticed something strange. On the left, a huge dark pine tree was bending over the road. Someone had tied a pink ribbon to a branch, and the ribbon was fluttering wildly, even though the air was completely still. I reached out and touched the ribbon. I even wet my finger and held it in the air to check for wind, just like my dad had taught me, but there was no breeze at all. The ribbon kept moving on its own. I told Jake, but he was distracted and didn't seem to notice. We kept walking. Eventually, we reached a spot where the hill sloped more gently and was set a little away from the road. The hill looked like it had been carved out in a big curve, almost like a small natural amphitheater. We stood on the stage, the road, with a clear view of the hillside covered in golden and red leaves. The trees started about 30 feet above us at the top of the hill. We stopped to take in the view. Fall in this part of the country really is beautiful. Jake suddenly got excited. He said he heard something moving in the Witch's Woods above us. He told me there were wild bobcats around, and one had babies nearby. For kids our age, hearing about kittens was the coolest thing ever. But I felt a chill. I couldn't relax thinking about cute kittens. Jake said he thought he heard a cat meow. I didn't hear anything. I thought he might be making it up. He suggested we try meowing to see if the cat would answer, maybe bring the kittens out to play. I didn't think it was a good idea. What kind of wild cat would respond to kids pretending to be cats? Sounded silly. Before I could say no, Jake started loudly meowing into the woods. To my shock, the forest meowed back. Jake was thrilled and meowed again. The woods answered him once more. I was creeped out but kept quiet to see what would happen. He kept meowing, and every time he did, a meow came back from the forest. It didn't seem like an echo because it only copied the meows, and the sound was clear and immediate. There were no rocks or hard surfaces around that could cause an echo. Everything was soft leaves. Jake got even more excited. Listen, the cat's coming to see us with her kittens. Then we heard leaves rustling above us on the slope, inside the dark woods. The sound got closer, but wildcats are light and quiet. They don't make so much noise walking. These sounds were loud and obvious, like heavy steps. My skin crawled. Jake kept calling for the kittens, unaware of the strange sounds. The noise was definitely coming toward us, but when I looked carefully, I couldn't see anything. We stood on a clear, open slope, with no trees blocking our view. Anything coming down the hill should have been visible, but there was nothing moving. Listen, the kittens are joining her, Jake said. Now the footsteps sounded like many pairs of feet coming from different directions, all moving closer, but still nothing was there to be seen. This was all wrong. I wanted to leave. Jake was mad, telling me to stop being scared. He wanted to see the kittens badly. My body was tense, ready to run. We were alone and very exposed on this stage, with something unknown coming closer. Suddenly, I heard loud, heavy breathing right by my feet. At first, I wasn't too worried. We had a Siberian husky at home, so I was used to dogs breathing like that near me. But then dread hit me. This wasn't our dog. This was a much bigger dog, and it was right next to me. But I couldn't see it. Panicking, I looked down, ready to jump away from the dog that somehow got so close without me noticing. There was nothing there. The loud panting kept going, coming from somewhere near me. I spun all around, shouting, "Where is it?" Nothing was near me, yet the sound was clear. In a panic, I looked back up the dirt road about 300 feet away, near the top of the hill, and saw a lone dog standing there. It looked like the Rottweiler Jake's dad had warned us about. It was in terrible condition. Matted fur missing in places, dirty, and with raw skin showing where fur was gone. It stared down at us. There was no way I could hear panting from so far away, and the panting I heard was right at my feet. That's when fear took over. I have never run so fast in my life. Luckily, it was downhill. Jake ran right beside me, just as scared. We got back home safe and never went into those woods again. This happened a few years back. It was a warm, early autumn night. I was 15 years old, riding my small 110 cubic centimeters dirt bike through a quiet town. I just wanted to clear my mind because I was going through a tough patch, and the low rumble of the engine always calmed me down. Most of the ride was quiet and normal, giving me the peace I needed. I was heading down a dead-end street that ended near a small lake where I could turn around and head back. About halfway down that road, I saw someone dressed all in white, walking along the side. That alone wouldn't be too odd since people often use that path for evening walks. But this was around 10:30 p.m., deep into the night, and the person had no flashlight or any kind of light on them. Plus, there weren't any homes along this 1.5 kilometer stretch, so I wasn't sure what they were doing there. I slowed down out of habit. Pedestrians can be unpredictable. That turned out to be a bad move. Just as I was passing the person, they suddenly let out the most terrifying scream I've ever heard. My heart jumped, and before I knew it, they charged straight at me. I scrambled to get the bike into a low gear. I glanced in my mirror and saw them chasing me. I pushed the throttle all the way open. For anyone who doesn't know, a 110 cubic centimeters bike isn't very powerful, and the one I had was barely faster than a person running. It also didn't help that I had swapped the front sprocket for a bigger one to save fuel by lowering the engine's RPM while cruising. As I hit nearly 8,000 RPM and got ready to shift gears, I suddenly felt a sharp hit on the back of my bike. Terrified, I revved the engine even higher, all the way up to 12,000 RPM, because I didn't want to change gears with that person so close behind me. They stayed right on my tail until I finally reached about 25 kilometers per hour. Then I started pulling away. I didn't slow down even after losing sight of them. But then panic set in as I remembered the road ended at a wooded trail. This bike was older and had a simple light switch. Newer models keep the lights on automatically. Out of instinct, I turned off the lights and shifted into fifth gear, trying to make as little noise as possible. I followed the gravel trail through the woods until it led me back to a regular road. I was speeding the whole time, constantly checking behind me. Even after I hit the main road, I kept going fast. When I finally reached home, I was shaking and drenched in sweat. I quickly opened the garage door and put my bike away while still watching my surroundings. I rushed inside, slammed the door, and locked it tight. The next day, I called a friend and told him about what happened. We went back together to check the woods for any sign of that person because I thought it might have been some kind of prank. But we found nothing, only our own footprints. We searched the forest along the road but saw no tracks or clues. I'm not someone who scares easily, and I'm not small. I'm about 180 centimeters tall with a strong build. But that scream, I've never heard anything like it, and it still sends shivers down my spine just thinking about it. I've told this story to a few friends, and they believed me since I don't usually get spooked or make things up. This was by far the scariest thing I've ever experienced on my bike at night. Looking back, I think I might have been able to defend myself, especially since I was wearing full riding gear. But when I heard that scream, my brain just told me to run. It was so loud and didn't sound human. I've stayed away from that road ever since and don't plan on going back. I still can't figure out what that person was doing out there in the middle of nowhere, at night, dressed all in white without any light. There's no hospital or asylum nearby, so it probably wasn't someone who ran away. Still, it makes no sense. Thanks for stopping by our little campsite here at Campfire Tales to hear this story. If you want to share your story on the show, send it to us for narration at shadowstories.org. For more stories from me, check out my other podcasts, Unknown Mysteries and Tales from the Woods, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite app. You can also visit spookypod.com for even more chilling podcasts. Follow me on X, formerly Twitter, at Shadow Whispers, and be sure to leave Campfire Tales a rating and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Until next time, when the campfire glows again. Growing up in a quiet part of northern Arizona, I spent a lot of my time outside, walking through the trees and rocky hills around my family's land. By the time I turned 12, I knew every trail and shortcut like the back of my hand. That made me feel confident, sometimes too confident. Now that I think about it, I was a little too sure of myself when I was alone out there. I used to believe nothing could touch me. That belief didn't last long. It all started the summer right before I started 7th grade. School was out, and my parents were busy at work most days, so I had a lot of time to myself. Sitting at home all day got old fast. My grandparents lived about 2 miles away through the woods, so I started walking over to visit some afternoons. It gave me something different to do, and honestly, I just wanted to raid their pantry. The first few trips were no big deal. Their small house sat right up against the edge of the trees, so once I came out of the woods, I was in their backyard. My grandma always lit up when I showed up. She'd head straight to the kitchen to make me a snack while I plopped down in front of the TV. After a while, it became a regular thing. The walk there and back was peaceful. Just me, the trees, and the breeze. But then, toward the end of June, things started to feel strange. The forest didn't sound the same. Birds weren't chirping. I didn't hear squirrels rustling. It felt too still, and the trees looked darker, almost like they were thicker than before. I thought maybe a storm was coming. I should have turned back then. I was about halfway to my grandparents' when the rain started. Just a few drops at first. I pulled my hoodie over my head and kept going. Then thunder rolled through the trees, way louder and closer than I expected. The wind picked up, tossing branches back and forth. Even though it was the middle of the afternoon, the sky turned a sickly greenish gray. I sped up, trying to reach the house before it really started pouring. But the storm hit fast. Sheets of rain came down hard, soaking me in seconds. Mud was everywhere. Cold water slid down my back and under my shirt. I was soaked through and freezing, but I kept going, thinking only of the warm house ahead. That's when I heard it. A sharp, horrible scream that cut through the wind and thunder. I'd never heard anything like it before. I froze. My eyes scanned the spaces between the trees, and that's when I saw a light. A flickering glow, moving like someone holding a lantern and walking toward me. Was it my grandpa? Maybe he came out to find me? I yelled for him, but with the storm raging, no one answered. The light moved closer, but it wasn't high enough. My grandpa was tall, and this light was low to the ground, like a kid holding it or something hunched over. I stepped back, unsure. Then that scream rang out again. It was nearer. The light bobbed side to side, weaving through the trees. My heart was thudding. I turned and ran. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just had to get away. I ran deeper into parts of the woods I didn't know, slipping and sliding in the mud, pushing through thick brush. Thorns scratched my arms and legs. My clothes caught on branches. Then lightning slammed into a tree close by. The crack made my ears ring, and the smell of burning would hit me even through the rain. Still, I didn't stop. I ran harder even as my feet kept slipping. I hit the ground once, tasting mud and maybe a little blood. That light, it was still there, weaving through the trees, getting closer. I got up and ran again. Another bolt of lightning struck right behind me, lighting up everything in white. The boom felt like it pushed me forward. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they'd snap. My chest ached, couldn't breathe right, but I couldn't stop. Then I broke into a clearing. There, leaning against the rock wall of a hill, was an old shack, probably left behind from mining days. I didn't think. I just threw myself at the broken door. As I slammed it shut behind me, the scream came again, this time just outside the clearing. I slid down against the inside of the door, trying to catch my breath. Everything was dark and cold and silent except for the pounding in my ears. That thing outside didn't leave. It let out another cry, something that sounded angry or maybe hurt. I don't even know. I must have passed out sitting there on the dirt floor, because the next thing I knew, it was totally quiet. No thunder, just soft rain tapping on the roof. The place was dark, and I couldn't see much, but it felt like that thing was gone. I got up slowly, muscles aching. My head was foggy. I stepped outside carefully. The clouds had cleared enough to let the moon shine through, just enough to help me see. I moved through the woods with my hands out in front of me, every step slow and careful. I kept expecting to hear that scream again or see that light, but I didn't. I walked all night, afraid to stop. I didn't know which way I was going. I just wanted to keep moving, to keep breathing. Somehow, as the sky started turning light, I came out of the trees and saw the back of my own house. I don't even remember running up the porch steps. I just know I got inside, slammed the door, and locked it. I collapsed on the floor and didn't get up for a long time. My parents never found out what happened that day. Camping used to be one of my top ways to spend time with my family. I loved being outdoors, cooking over an open flame, telling old stories while staring at the stars. My wife, Sarah, and I used to bring our boy, Lucas, on camping trips whenever we could. But ever since that weekend at Red Pine State Grounds when he was 12, I don't think I'll ever be able to enjoy it the same way again. It was early October, perfect weather before it really got cold. We drove up to one of our usual spots, Red Pine State Grounds, late Friday afternoon. Our campsite was in a quieter area, tucked away between huge evergreens. After we unpacked and got a small fire going, we roasted some sausages for dinner. Lucas was thrilled. After the sun dropped, I told him a few creepy forest stories. He was at that age where spooky stuff was still fun and exciting instead of something that actually kept him up at night. After that, we all got into the tent, tired from the ride and setting everything up. That first night sleeping outside is always the best. Quiet, peaceful, tucked away in the woods. The next morning, I made pancakes over the fire. While we were eating, a ranger stopped by to welcome us. He was a thin older man with a big gray mustache. After chatting a bit, he reminded us to store all food properly because bears had been spotted nearby lately. I told him we brought our usual bear-proof storage box and used it every time we camped. Once he left, we headed off on a trail walk. Sarah's really into bird watching, so she brought her binoculars and a little book to help identify birds. We saw jays, warblers, and a few robins. Lucas said he was kind of bored, but I could tell he was actually enjoying himself. Later that day, we hung around the site reading old magazines and playing card games. As the sun dipped down, I noticed a man at the site across from ours. He started glancing our way more often as it got dark. He looked to be about my age. Mid-40s, scruffy, weathered, not exactly friendly looking. He was sipping from a can and flicking ash from a cigarette into the fire while poking at it. I told myself not to worry, but something about his stare gave me a bad feeling. I made sure to get Lucas into the tent early once it got fully dark, just to be safe. Sarah and I stayed up a bit longer by the fire, talking quietly and watching the stars. Around midnight, we finally decided to call it a night. Later, I woke suddenly to sounds right outside the tent. Twigs cracking, leaves shifting. I held still and listened carefully. Sarah and Lucas were still fast asleep beside me. The noise kept going, slow steps, close to the tent wall. My heart started racing. I thought about everything that could be out there. A bear? A mountain lion? That weird man? Carefully and slowly, I reached for the flashlight sitting near my feet. I switched it on and looked around inside. Nothing. But the steps outside kept going, soft and steady, like someone circling us. I took a breath, slowly unzipped the tent, and stuck my head out just enough to look. I expected maybe a raccoon or something like that. But no, it was the man from across the road, crouched near our tent, just a few feet away. His back was to me. When my flashlight beam hit him, he whipped around fast. We locked eyes for a moment, and in the light, I saw something wild in his face. His eyes wide and empty. Then, without a word, he lunged straight at me. I fell backward into the tent, yelling for Sarah and Lucas to get up. The man started crawling into the tent after me. Sarah was already pulling Lucas out the other side. I kicked hard at the man's face as he tried to squeeze in. One of my kicks caught him in the mouth, and he yelled out in pain. I scrambled out after my family, slicing open the tent wall with my pocket knife. The man burst out behind me, blood dripping from his lip, coming right at me again. I dodged to the side and ran after Sarah and Lucas, who were already sprinting toward the main road of the campground. We shouted for help as loud as we could. Within moments, other campers were stepping out of their tents. I pointed back toward where the man had been, yelling that he had attacked us. I looked and saw him slipping away into the woods, past our ripped-up tent. A few campers helped call 911. Others came to check on us, making sure we weren't hurt. A couple of them went to search the trees, but the man had vanished. Police and paramedics showed up not long after. We gave them our reports, still shaken and exhausted. We decided there was no way we'd stay another night. Instead, we drove to a motel about 30 minutes away. I hardly slept. The next morning, we packed up what we had left behind and went straight home. Sarah and I were rattled. I'd always felt safe in the woods before, always felt like I knew what I was doing out there. That feeling was gone. Lucas never asked to go camping again, and I never brought it up. Jared was especially quiet during the ride back. He's 19 now, but hasn't gone on a camping trip since that day. To be honest, it took me several years before I could feel at ease in the woods again. What once felt calm and peaceful now feels full of unseen threats hidden among the trees. I can't help but wonder what, or who, might show up at my tent flap the next time I'm out there. I don't hike by myself anymore, not after what happened in those woods near Mill Creek. Just thinking back gives me chills. How close I came to something unknown, something that might have ended very badly. Back then, I was seeing a guy named Evan. We'd been together for about half a year, and we both enjoyed doing outdoor activities together, canoeing, hiking, stuff like that. One Saturday, we made plans to explore a state reserve about 35 minutes outside town that neither of us had been to before. We got a late start that morning and didn't arrive until nearly noon. The weather was perfect. We stopped at the park station and picked up a map. A ranger inside marked off a 6-mile loop trail on it, saying it led to a lookout point above a waterfall. We geared up, boots, water packs, and all, and started down the trail. We chatted and took in the views as we hiked. The trail started out wide and clearly marked, but gradually got steeper as we moved uphill. About 50 minutes in, we hit a split in the trail that wasn't marked on the map. We stood there debating which way to go. Evan thought we should turn left. He said he could kind of hear running water from that direction and figured it was the falls. So we went that way. As we kept walking, the path became harder to follow. Brush crowded in, making it difficult to see much around us. About 20 more minutes in, I started to feel uneasy. I told Evan maybe we'd gone the wrong way, but he waved off my concern. "It's just a little farther," he said. "Even if it's not the waterfall, maybe it's something even cooler." Then the forest got real thick, the kind where sunlight barely reaches the ground. We pushed through for a while until I came out into a small opening. But Evan wasn't there. I called out for him, but there was no answer. He'd been just a few steps behind me. How did he vanish so fast? I turned back, searching the trail behind me, but nothing, not even a footprint. I grew more panicked with each step, especially when the trail forked again ahead and neither path looked right. I shouted his name again, but all I heard in return was quiet. I picked one path and followed it, hoping it would take me back to the main trail. But the farther I went, the more lost I felt. The afternoon was slipping away, the sunlight dimming. I began walking faster, desperate to spot a signpost, a familiar tree, anything. My heart thudded as the forest grew darker around me. Random sounds echoed, snapping twigs, rustling leaves, and once, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. But when I stopped to listen, everything went still again. I had run out of water and was exhausted. I sat on a fallen log, resting my face in my hands, feeling like crying. I had no clue where I was. Just then, the sharp snap of a branch broke the silence. I shot upright, heart pounding. My eyes scanned the woods. That's when I saw him. About 30 yards away, a tall man stood between the trees, perfectly still, just standing there. "Evan," I called out, but I knew the second I said it that it wasn't him. The man was too tall, the build wrong, and he didn't move or respond, just stood there, half in shadow, staring in my direction. Dread swept over me. I reached for the biggest branch I could find nearby and held it like a club. I shouted, "Back off!" He didn't move, didn't say anything, just stood there, barely noticeable in the dim woods, watching me. I didn't know who he was or why he was there, but I wasn't going to wait around to find out. Clutching my makeshift weapon, I turned and started running. I sprinted, pausing now and then to glance behind me. He was gone. At least I couldn't see him anymore. Eventually, I stopped in a small clearing, chest heaving, sweat pouring down my face. I was shaking all over. It was getting darker. I had no idea where I was and didn't know if that man was still behind me. I sat for a moment trying to think. Should I keep going and try to find the trail again? Should I stay put and wait for help? My thoughts were jumbled. But one thing was clear. I needed to get out of those woods. I took a few deep breaths, then stood and looked around. Off in the distance, I thought I heard the faint hum of cars. Maybe a highway. If I followed that sound, maybe I could find a road. A town. Something. I moved quickly in the direction of the noise, heart pounding at every sound, every twig cracking or branch rustling. Was that man still following me? What did he want? I kept going, dodging branches and tripping over roots as the woods got darker. Strange bird calls and small animals scurrying in the brush made the place feel alive with something wrong. Every few steps, I turned to check behind me. Finally, the traffic noise grew louder. I could make out engine sounds. I must be close to a road. My spirits lifted. I quickened my steps, ready to be done with this. Then, just ahead, maybe 25 feet away, a tall figure stepped out from behind a tree, right in my path. I screamed. It was him, the same man as before. He'd somehow gotten ahead of me. He stepped forward, and I could now make out more of his face in the fading light. What I saw made my stomach twist. His skin looked damaged, scarred, and stretched oddly like melted plastic. One eye was cloudy and the other stared right at me. Long, greasy hair clung to his face, and a twisted bulge on one cheek made his mouth look misshapen. He grinned, a horrible grin. Then, in a deep, scratchy voice, he said, "What's the rush? Stick around." His voice hit me like a punch of fear. My body screamed at me to run. As he moved closer, I raised my branch and swung as hard as I could. He dodged it, then lunged. I turned and took off, crashing through the woods, heart racing. I could hear him chasing me, his footsteps pounding, branches snapping. He let out a harsh gurgling yell, angry that I'd gotten away. I pushed my legs harder, but he was gaining on me. Then, through the trees' lights, I burst out into a paved parking lot, almost stumbling. Cars, people, a road. Relief hit me like a wave. I spotted a couple with 2 kids loading their SUV and ran toward them, gasping and panicked. I tried to explain what happened, stammering about the man chasing me. The dad and teen son looked toward the forest, then quickly opened the doors and got me inside the vehicle, locking the doors. The son called for help while the mom handed me a water bottle and tried to calm me. I was trembling, barely able to talk. A short while later, red and blue lights lit up the lot. A patrol car arrived, and one officer stayed with me while the other headed toward the woods. I told them everything, trying to make sense through sobs. They searched, but didn't find anyone. I was driven to the station where they figured out I'd wandered over 7 miles off the original loop trail from Oak Hollow Reserve. The rangers there were notified, and soon they got in touch with Evan. He'd finally found his way back and had been looking for me too. He was a mess, just as lost and scared as I had been. At the station, he kept apologizing for pushing us to take that wrong trail. When I told him about the man I saw, he held me and said I was safe now. But I still see that face in my sleep sometimes. I'll never know if that man was some twisted drifter hiding in the woods, or just something my fear created out of the dark. But I know what I saw, and I know I'll never feel the same walking alone in the woods again. My brother Matt and I moved out to Utah a few years ago. We both wanted to live near the mountains, but neither of us could afford it alone. So we split the rent on a townhouse in a suburb just outside Salt Lake City. This worked out well because we were only about 10 to 15 minutes from a long stretch of mountains. One thing I should say about the nearby hiking and camping trails is that they get very busy. Because they're so easy to reach for locals and tourists, it's almost impossible to find any quiet time there most of the year. Because of that, my brother and I decided to plan a 3-day backpacking trip to get away from the crowds and hopefully find some peace and quiet. I trusted him to plan the route, and a couple of weeks later, we drove to the trailhead. When we got there, only one other car was parked. It was an old, dusty pickup truck that looked like it had been through some rough roads. Since it seemed like only one other person was hiking that trail, we were hopeful and started out with good spirits. The first day of hiking was about 8 miles. Most of the path was flat, but in the last few miles we climbed up the side of a mountain. It was tiring, but Matt promised the campsite would be worth it, and he was right. About 3/4 of the way up the mountain, we found a small flat spot on the edge of a cliff with a breathtaking view of the whole valley. The sunset made it even more beautiful. After taking in the view, we set up our tents and gathered some sticks and stones to build a fire pit. Once the fire was burning, we sat down and just talked. I have no idea how long we talked, but it felt like at least a couple of hours. Then, out of nowhere, we heard something on the trail. We instantly went quiet and listened closely as footsteps slowly approached our camp. A minute later, a man appeared out of the dark, stepping into the faint glow from our fire. He wasn't wearing a headlamp, which every hiker and camper knows is essential when it might get dark outside. As he got closer, both Matt and I felt something was wrong. He had a strange grin on his face as he neared the fire. Matt stood up and asked if he needed anything. The man looked at both of us, keeping that weird smile, and said he was a park officer who had been tracking our trail for some time. He told us this part of the park was closed for the season and that we weren't supposed to be there. Something didn't sit right because we knew the park was open, and we had even gotten permits from the state just the day before for camping there. Also, park officers wouldn't usually be out on a mountain trail in the middle of the night. If he wasn't really who he said he was, then what was he doing here? I could see Matt was thinking the same thing as we both looked at the man and started to ask questions, but he quickly interrupted us. "You both need to leave with me right now. Pack up and follow me. I'll lead you back to the trailhead," he said. We stood there quietly for a moment, realizing something was seriously wrong. The man stayed by the fire with that same eerie grin on his face. "No, we're staying here," Matt said firmly. The man looked at him again, then at me, still smiling strangely. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. We were terrified and didn't say a word for several minutes, just listening carefully to make sure he didn't come back. Then we gathered some dry sticks and made the fire burn brighter again. Neither of us could sleep. We stayed awake the whole night, sometimes hearing what sounded like footsteps but never seeing the man again. When morning came, we packed up and cut our trip short, retracing the trail back to our car. When we got back, that same dusty pickup truck was still there. It made us wonder if the other hiker had also met the strange man, and what might have happened to them. We reported the encounter to the police but never heard anything back. There was no doubt the man was lying about being a park officer, and the fact he tried to lead us out into the woods in the middle of the night means he was probably planning something terrible. What exactly, we don't know, but it seems like the other hiker might have been unlucky enough to find out. I was 16 years old when it happened. The moon was full, shining cold and bright over a thick forest while I hiked through it with a couple of friends, Jack and Mia. At first, the night felt peaceful, like a perfect fall evening. But once the sun sank all the way down, the forest quickly felt different, heavier, almost mean. Something about it made the air colder and our footsteps quieter. I noticed my friends looking uneasy, so I tried to joke. "Come on, don't freak out," I said. "It's just the dark and maybe a few animals. We'll be fine." Jack, always the bold one, had been the one to talk us into doing a hike under moonlight in the first place. He said it'd be a cool memory, something none of us would forget. And now, with strange shadows creeping in and the trees pressing in closer, I was starting to wish I hadn't agreed. Mia, who had barely spoken since we entered the woods, finally said something. "Chris, I don't know about this," she said. "It's way too quiet, and I've heard weird stuff about this place during full moons." I'd heard those same stories too. People talked about pets going missing, or seeing shapes in the woods they couldn't explain. I used to think it was all just made-up nonsense. But as we walked deeper in, a cold chill crept up my back. "Relax, Mia," Jack said with a grin, throwing an arm around her. "You're just spooking yourself. We've got Chris to keep us safe, right?" I forced a grin, trying to seem calm even though I felt anything but. "Yeah, don't worry. Nothing's gonna happen." We kept moving, the only sounds being leaves crunching under our boots and the far-off hoot of an owl. The moonlight trickled between the branches, casting long, twisted shadows across the ground. I started to feel like someone or something was nearby watching us. Then we saw an old side path, covered in thorny bushes and fallen wood. It was completely hidden until we stumbled on it. Jack's eyes lit up. "Hey, check this out," he said, pointing at it. "Maybe it's a faster way back to the road. Let's go." Mia and I looked at each other, unsure, but followed him anyway as he used his pocket knife to cut through the overgrowth. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't supposed to be going this way. It was like the woods didn't want us there. As we moved along the path, the forest around us grew tighter, the branches above blocking out the moon and stars. The air got colder, and it started to smell weird, damp and stale. "Jack, are you sure about this?" Mia asked, her voice a little shaky. Jack stopped for a second and glanced back. "We're already in it. Might as well see where it ends. It has to go somewhere, right?" We kept going, the thick leaves underfoot muffling our steps. The dark felt like it was swallowing everything. I noticed deep gouges in the bark of nearby trees. They looked like they'd been clawed by something, and recently, I showed them to Jack and Mia. "Probably just a bear," Jack said, though he didn't sound very sure. "Are there bears here?" Mia asked quietly. "Yeah, But they usually stay away from people, I answered, trying to keep her calm. We kept moving. The scratches kept showing up more and more. I had this gut feeling that someone was following us. I regretted not turning around when we had the chance. It felt like the woods had swallowed us up. I couldn't even tell where the main trail was anymore. After what felt like forever, we stepped into a small open area. In the middle was an old wooden cabin, clearly falling apart. The roof had holes in it and the windows were smashed. Who would build a place out here? Mia asked, voice shaking. I didn't know what to say. It felt like we were in a dream, the bad kind you want to wake up from. I was starting to think we had really messed up. Jack, still eager for adventure, said, "Come on, let's check it out. Maybe there's something cool inside." We didn't want to, but we followed him in. The door creaked loudly as it swung open. I flinched. I hoped we weren't disturbing anyone or anything. Inside, it was quiet except for the wind blowing through the broken glass. Moonlight spilled in, showing dust and webs covering every surface. No one had been here in years, maybe decades. Then I saw something strange. Long scratches carved into the wooden walls. "Guys, look at this," I said, pointing. Jack leaned in close to study the marks. "These aren't from an animal. They look like someone did this." A chill ran down my spine. Someone had been here and not too long ago. "We need to get out of here," I said. As we turned to leave, we heard a low growl coming from outside. We froze, hearts racing. "What was that?" Mia asked, her face pale. "I don't know, but it didn't sound like a bear," I whispered. Jack crept toward the doorway, peeked out. "I don't see anything, but we've gotta go." We stepped back into the woods, and the growling got louder, more threatening. I felt like something was hunting us. The moon hung high now, casting the forest in a pale, ghostly light. All of us looked terrified. I know I was. We moved quickly down the trail, but the growling kept getting closer. Every rustle in the bushes made me jump. I was more scared than I'd ever been. Then suddenly, a dark shape leapt out of the trees. It was huge, covered in thick fur. Its eyes glowed with a strange light. My brain locked onto one word: werewolf. It looked like those creatures from old horror movies, half man, half wolf. "Run!" Jack yelled, snapping me out of my shock. We ran as fast as we could. The thing chased us, its heavy steps pounding behind us, breath loud and ragged. My chest hurt, couldn't breathe, but I ran harder. Trees flew by in a blur. I could hear it getting closer. This growl was turning wild. I risked a look behind me. The creature was gaining. It had glowing yellow eyes and a snarling mouth full of sharp teeth and dripping spit. I pushed myself to run faster, legs burning, lungs on fire. Finally, we broke free of the trail and hit the main path. I didn't look back, but I heard it. A howl, angry and loud. It stopped chasing us. For some reason, it wouldn't cross the trail behind us. I don't know why. We didn't stop until we reached the car. We were gasping, shaking, and laughing. I think we were just glad to be alive. Driving away, I couldn't stop thinking about those old stories I used to laugh off. Those glowing eyes still show up in my nightmares. None of us ever told anyone what really happened that night. We knew no one would believe it, but we all agreed never to go back. It's a secret we plan to keep forever. But writing this out anonymously helps me deal with it. I still wonder about that creature. Whatever it was, why did it chase us? What did it want? Answering what I saw that afternoon is still hard. It moved easily through the trees, like it had done it before. Even now, I find myself glancing upward anytime I walk in the woods. I've never seen anything that quite fits what I saw, and I've looked off and on for years. This might not be the most terrifying story out there, but it's easily one of the strangest I've got. It happened in the Shawanese Ridge, up near Northton. It was the summer of 2018. I had just finished my college degree and wanted to treat myself to something memorable before stepping into my new job. I figured a solo backpacking trip for a week would be a great idea. I chose the Shawanese Ridge Mountains. I'd spent my whole childhood in the Blue Woods, so I knew my way around trails and campsites. Being alone didn't bother me. The first few days were perfect, clear skies, warm but not uncomfortable. I was hiking 8 to 10 miles a day, just enjoying the peacefulness. I came across a couple of other hikers along the way, but for the most part, I was alone and loving it. By the third morning, though, things felt off. The sounds of animals and birds had faded. Everything felt quieter, and the few hikers I passed didn't return my waves or greetings. They seemed anxious, like they were hurrying to leave. I figured maybe I was just getting deeper into the remote areas, but something didn't feel right. That night, I made camp by a stream and got a fire going, though the air was still warm enough that I didn't need it. I left the flap of my tent open for the breeze. As I lay there drifting towards sleep, I thought I heard slow steps moving outside. Leaves crackled underfoot. I sat up and listened, but after a moment it was just the usual night sounds. Still, I had trouble getting back to sleep after that. I kept moving the next day, climbing out of the river valley and into rougher terrain. The path grew more uneven, and the woods got thicker. The feeling of being watched came over me more than once, but I never saw anyone. I kept telling myself it was just in my head, a side effect of being alone for too long. As night settled in, I pitched my tent in a wide patch of grass up on a ridge with a great view of the peaks around me. I ate, cleaned up, and crawled into my tent. A full moon shone so brightly it lit up the inside of the tent, casting weird shapes that made me blink a few times before I could sleep. Sometime in the night, I jolted awake as the tent suddenly collapsed on top of me. The poles buckled and pressed down, trapping me inside. I fought to get free, thinking maybe a bear had stumbled into the tent. But when I got out, nothing was there. The poles were wrecked, but the tent fabric wasn't torn at all. The air was still, not a sound, just moonlight and silence. Shaken, I fixed what I could and tried to rest again. The next morning, I packed up as fast as I could. That ridge felt too exposed. The air had cooled overnight, and the sky was heavy with dark clouds. Thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. I walked faster, trying to reach the next trail shelter before the storm started. Rain hit hard right as I saw the shelter ahead. I ran the last stretch, soaked and out of breath, glad to see it was empty. But when I stepped inside and took off my jacket, I noticed something was wrong. There were scratch marks, like from hands and claws, across the inner walls. Old, dirty cloth scraps were tossed in the corners. The fire pit held blackened bones and gave off a sharp smell like burnt hair and meat. I backed out quickly, heart thudding. The wind picked up and tore through the woods like it was howling. That's when I saw it. A massive, misshapen figure was slowly moving between the trees. I didn't stop to think. I bolted into the rain. Water slapped against my face. Thunder cracked overhead. I slipped and stumbled, tearing through the undergrowth, tree limbs grabbing at my arms. Whatever was chasing me was crashing through behind me, getting closer. I broke into a clearing just as lightning hit behind me with a roar so loud it froze me in place. I turned slowly. Nothing. The forest was calm again. Rain dripping, wind easing, no sign of anything. Was it all in my head? I found a small cave in the rocks nearby and crawled as far in as I could. I wrapped my arms around myself, shaking from the cold and shock. Eventually, the storm passed. I stepped out to figure out where I was, but it was already getting dark. I had to find a safe spot to camp. My hands were numb, and my feet felt like blocks of ice. I stumbled along, flinching at every sound. In a thicket of thick woods, the feeling came back. That crawling sensation on the back of my neck. I was being watched again. I started jogging. The sun was nearly gone now, the trail growing dark. The shadows reached out across the ground. I rounded a bend and slammed into something. It wasn't solid like a tree, more like running into a thick curtain. I staggered back and looked up. It had a pale face, almost gray-white. Its eye sockets were deep, empty pits. Yellow teeth poked out from cracked lips. It loomed over me, its shape just wrong. I screamed and turned to run, but its arms reached out, long, twisted hands grabbing my shoulders. I felt claws scrape across my skin. Its breath stunk like rot, and its mouth stretched open far too wide, like it could swallow me whole. Everything went black. I must have blacked out, because when I opened my eyes, I was alone again. The forest was quiet. That thing, if it was ever real, was gone. I got up slowly, heart still pounding, and ran. I didn't stop to look back. Branches tore at my arms and legs. I kept thinking, just get to the car. Just make it out. When I finally broke through the trees and saw the parking lot below, I almost cried. I half ran, half fell down the final part of the trail. I threw my gear into the back seat, jumped in, locked the doors, and sped down the winding mountain road. Even inside the car, I could hear something screaming in the woods behind me. The sound echoed along the road, bouncing between the trees. What made that noise, I still don't know. I drove all night, not stopping once until I got home. This experience happened when I was a teenager, so it's been well over 15 years now. I grew up near the Deep Pine Hills region, spending most of my youth outdoors, camping, hiking, or just wandering the woods. For 2 summers in a row, I joined a cleanup crew that worked the backcountry roads. Our job was mainly to collect trash along remote roads and trails. Every now and then, park officials would ask us to take care of old dumping areas tucked deep into the woods. On this particular day, our group split up to cover different zones. We had GPS units, but back then they weren't very reliable, usually accurate within about 100 meters at best. That didn't bother me much. I had dreams of becoming a guide or working in forest services, so I was used to being out there. Others in the group stuck closer to the main roads. I got dropped off at the far end of an old service trail and was told to work my way back toward the others. They gave us garbage bags and a stick with a metal tip to pick up the trash. The area I was assigned was one of the more notorious dump spots. People would leave old recliners, busted furniture, and even mattresses. But someone with a trailer had already cleared out most of the large stuff. What was left was mostly broken glass, cans, wrappers, and scraps of junk. Now and then, though, we'd come across more disturbing things people didn't want to deal with properly. That day, I found a small litter of puppies. They hadn't survived. If I'd been issued a radio, I would have called it in, and someone would have come to help. They usually tried to keep us young workers away from anything really upsetting. Unfortunately, that wasn't the first time I'd seen something like that. I gently gathered the poor animals into one of the bags. Rather than leave them in the pile with everything else, I decided to give them a burial. I set down my gear near the road, my bag and the trash stick, and headed into the woods with just the bag. I walked about 20 minutes, deeper into the trees, until I found a big old pine that felt like a peaceful place. I set the bag down and began walking slowly in circles, looking for anything I could use to dig. I eventually found a thick branch, which I snapped in half. I used my small knife to sharpen one end, then got to work digging under the tree. It was slow going, plenty of roots in the way. After making a hole about 1.5 feet deep, I laid the puppies to rest outside of the bag. I didn't want to leave more trash behind. I took a few moments. I was emotional. Any kind of mistreatment of animals hits hard. Just as I was finishing covering the hole with dirt and pine needles, I heard a crack. A small branch had snapped off maybe 50 feet to my left. I crouched low under the tree and froze. It wasn't one of those moments where the whole forest suddenly goes quiet. I still heard birds, though they seemed to be calling from farther away, off to the right. I hadn't noticed them move until that moment. I sat there quietly, listening. A couple of minutes passed, and nothing else happened. I peeked around, trying to see where the sound came from, but I didn't notice anything. Eventually, I stood up and finished covering the grave with pine cones and a smooth rock I'd found. As I turned to head back, I heard a strange sound, halfway between a low groan and a growl. We were in bear territory, and cougars weren't unheard of either. So at first, I thought maybe a predator had picked up on my scent or the smell of the burial. I had only my pocket knife, nothing more for defense. Still, I wasn't terrified yet. Trees rubbing together in the breeze can make strange noises, and it wasn't uncommon around there. I scanned the area and saw nothing, but just as I turned to keep walking, another branch and strip of bark fell down from a tree, this one about 30 yards away from the pine I just left. I looked up. The tree was smaller than the pine, maybe half the size, and about halfway up, I saw something. It's hard to describe. It was a dull mix of grayish-brown and mossy green. No clear shape, about the size of a bear cub. I stepped back fast, startled. My heart jumped, and I took a few steps away, keeping my eyes on it. I still couldn't tell if it was alive or not, until it moved. Then I knew it wasn't just part of the tree. It began to shift, and I could see it more clearly. It didn't have fur like a bear or a cat, and it wasn't skin either. It looked like living moss, but thicker. I know there are no sloths around there, and this wasn't anything like that anyway. I couldn't even tell if it had a head until it turned. Then I saw it had a face, but not a clear one. No eyes that I could make out. No clear mouth. Just something dark and squished looking. I was probably 75 to 80 feet away, and with the overcast sky and thick canopy above, I couldn't make out many details. But it had 4 limbs, long ones, wrapped around the tree like arms. Its paws reminded me of raccoon hands, but the claws were as long as fingers. It had a long, hairless tail that swayed behind it like a rat's, maybe as long as its whole body. I watched it slowly descend the tree, never taking its eyes off me. That's when I noticed it had small, round ears, more like a person's than an animal's. It barely made a sound, just a faint scraping as it climbed. When it reached a thick branch about 12 feet up, it moved out along it. The way it moved was like a raccoon, but the body shape didn't match. It had no snout like a bear or a weasel, and the head was round with barely a neck. Its skin, or whatever it was, seemed able to blend into the tree bark or moss. The eyes caught a bit of sunlight once and flashed pale. The whole body looked like something you'd overlook if you weren't paying close attention. Then it made a strange noise, a soft whistle, low and drawn out. That was all I needed. I quickly turned to check my path back and started moving, brisk but not in a full panic. I kept glancing over my shoulder, making sure it wasn't following. I never saw that thing again. But even now, I still think about it. Later that day, I told the park leader about it. He said it was probably just a sick raccoon. I told him the face looked wrong, and he said I probably saw it wrong. I know what raccoons look like. This wasn't one. The face reminded me vaguely of one of those short-nosed monkeys, but the shape, the movement, the color, it didn't fit anything I know. There are no wild monkeys around here, and it wasn't an escaped pet either. Whatever I saw that day, it wasn't something I could explain. And I still can't. It was usual for my dad to pick me and my 2 brothers up after school and drive us into the hills for an afternoon of gathering firewood. My dad would cut down trees and saw them into pieces. My brothers and I had the job of rolling the logs to the truck and then stacking them inside. We kept this routine going until the truck was full of wood, usually before it got dark. Hot, sweaty, and tired, we would pile into the truck cab and head back down the hill. At home the next day, we would unload the wood, split it, and stack it into tidy piles. We repeated this process until we had enough wood to last through the winter, not only for our house but for our grandma's cabin too, and any extra we gave to some older neighbors nearby. This particular afternoon, we decided to try a different logging path on the far side of the valley. It was well outside the usual area where our family cut wood. There was no big reason for the change. Dad just said he wanted a change of scenery. That logging road hadn't been taken care of in a while. Big rocks and fallen branches blocked the way. My brothers and I walked ahead, moving rocks and logs out of the way while Dad carefully drove the truck up the tight curves. Slowly, yard by yard, we made our way up the mountain. The climb was tough. As we got higher and deeper into the forest, I began to feel strange. I wasn't sure if it was just the tiredness from the hard climb or something else. There was a strange buzz in the air, like the whole mountain was alive with a quiet energy just beneath my skin. In some weird way, it felt like the mountain knew we were there, and it didn't like it. Before I could say anything to my brothers, my younger brother stopped and asked, "Does anyone else feel like we shouldn't be here?" My older brother and I froze and looked back at him. We both nodded, feeling the same way. Our thoughts were cut short when Dad honked and motioned for us to keep clearing the path. Reluctantly, we pushed on until we reached a small clearing where we finally stopped the truck. Dad didn't seem to notice our nervousness, or maybe he just ignored it. He grabbed his saw and got to work. As the wood was cut and loaded, I couldn't shake the heavy, dark feeling that hung over us. My brothers kept glancing behind them while we worked, and except for Dad, everyone seemed tense. The sun slipped behind the trees, and dusk began to fall. As the light faded, my unease grew. Then Dad suddenly told us to load up. Relief washed over me, and I saw my brothers relax too. The truck wasn't full, an unusual thing since Dad often worked until dark just to fill it. But tonight, he seemed eager to leave. Once everything was loaded, we started back down the road. Even though we were worn out, everyone felt lighter. We joked and laughed, trying to shake off the day's tension. We were almost out of the tree line and back into the valley when going down the sharp turns. Dad warned us to be careful, especially with the load. Then suddenly, a brown shape darted out from the slope on the side of the road. The only word Dad said was a sharp curse as he slammed on the brakes. Loaded with wood and heading downhill, there was no way to avoid hitting it. The truck came to a stop, and the four of us stared through the windshield, silent. Bathed in the yellow light of the headlights was the crumpled body of a deer. Grumbling, Dad got out to check. My brothers stayed in the truck, but I didn't listen. I jumped out and followed Dad. The truck was fine. We hadn't been going fast when we hit the deer, just some hair and blood on the front grille. Hitting a deer wasn't strange. The hills were full of them. What was strange was how the deer had fallen so quickly. Usually, deer would try to get up and run off after being hit. The last burst of adrenaline makes them limp away, but this one fell like a rag doll. As we got closer, a terrible smell hit us. Deer smell bad when they're alive, but this was worse. It was the smell of rot and decay. My stomach turned as I looked closer. The deer was clearly dead, really dead. The stench was so strong my eyes watered. The deer's eyes were missing, replaced by empty, sunken holes. Its tongue was swollen and black, hanging out of its mouth. The belly was ripped open, and its guts spilled onto the dirt. In the dim light, it almost looked like the insides were moving, wriggling. I held my breath and leaned in for a closer look. My heart stopped. The deer was covered in maggots, inside and out. It was definitely dead, but our truck hadn't killed it. This deer had been dead for days, maybe weeks. I stepped back, feeling sick. That strange buzzing feeling came back, stronger now. Dad was usually calm and quiet, but even in the dim light, I could see the fear on his face. His eyes weren't on the deer. They stared down the mountain, trying to hide his fear. He told me firmly to walk back to the truck and get inside. I obeyed. As I reached for the door handle, a loud, blood-curdling scream erupted from the trees. Branches snapped and cracked. Something was coming up the hill toward us. I slammed the door shut just as Dad got in the truck. Before he could close his door, he pressed the gas and the truck jumped forward, driving right over the deer's body and speeding downhill. With my brothers yelling, it was hard to tell if the screaming was chasing us or if it was fading behind. We burst out of the trees and into the open valley. Once we were clear of the woods, everything went quiet. Only the sound of the engine and wind through the open windows remained. Pulling into our yard, the truck stopped, and we sat in silence. No one moved or spoke at first, then suddenly everyone talked at once, each with questions. What was that scream? How could a dead deer jump in front of us? The truck didn't kill it. Dad shook his head and told us to quiet down. That deer had been dead when we hit it. It didn't jump in front of us. It was thrown there. We all stared at him. Dad explained that he had felt uneasy all day but kept it to himself so he wouldn't scare us. He said it was like walking into someone's house while they were asleep upstairs, a feeling that never left him. At dusk, he caught a shadow moving through the trees, figures slipping between trunks. He couldn't see them clearly before they vanished. His stomach dropped, but he stayed calm and hurried us back to the truck. After hitting the deer and seeing it was long dead, Dad put the pieces together. Something had thrown that deer to make us stop before the screaming started. He could hear things moving in the darkness beyond the road. It was a trap. Running back might have caused an attack or triggered something to chase us, so we walked. The second we were inside, Dad drove down the mountain fast, not stopping for anything. That buzzing feeling didn't go away until we reached the main highway. My brothers and I never saw anything again, but those screams in the forest will haunt me forever. We didn't gather wood again that season. For the first time ever, Dad bought what we needed. Though we went back the next season, we never returned to that mountain. The Forest Service permanently closed that road, letting nature take it back. The only way back there now is a long hike, and I'm not interested. Whatever was on that mountain, whatever threw that deer, whatever chased us, it didn't want us there. It wanted us gone. Or maybe worse, it wanted us dead. My name is Emily. I'm from San Diego, and I recently found your Spotify podcast. I think I have a story that might interest you and your listeners. Back in 2014, I read a book called Untamed by a woman named Laura Reese. It was about how her life fell apart after her mother passed away, and how hiking helped her heal and rebuild herself. Most of the book was set on the Pacific Crest Trail, and the physical struggle of walking so many miles helped her understand important truths about her life. To me, it seemed like the challenge of trekking over 1,000 miles opened a door to some deep, old wisdom inside her. I was 24 years old when I read it, and honestly, it connected with me more than any other book or movie I'd ever experienced. I wanted that same kind of clarity, that quiet knowing about what matters in life and what doesn't. But I didn't think I could ever hike the entire PCT by myself. Everything changed around 2017 when I finally got the hiking bug and started planning my own trip along a part of the Pacific Crest Trail to try to find the same kind of magic I'd read about in Untamed. Since I couldn't take much time off work, I decided to hike a 5-night section near a small town called Mojave on the western edge of the Mojave Desert. I picked this spot for 3 reasons. First, I loved the part of Laura's book that talked about this region. Second, it was easy to drive there. And third, I was honestly scared of tackling the northern parts of the trail during fall or winter. This was my first time doing anything outdoorsy, and after hearing all kinds of scary stories about accidents, I didn't want to jump in too fast. So 5 nights in Southern California was my taste test. On the first day, I left early from San Diego and drove to Mojave. I parked my car at a small campground I booked, planning to leave it there for a few days. Then I started my hike, about 9 miles to a place called Oak Ridge. Let me tell you, it was hot even for early fall. I was desperate to reach a spot called Lake Castaic by the end of the day. The next day, I had to hike 20 miles to the lake, which I call my challenge day. The first day's 9 miles were just a warm-up so I could get used to the pace, the land, and following the trail. But the second day was where I wanted to push myself like Laura did in her book. Honestly, I couldn't have picked a worse section. I had to hike up and out of a valley, which was brutal on my legs since they weren't used to so much effort. The only relief was walking through shaded patches of chaparral. By the time I reached Lake Castaic, I was so exhausted I almost fell asleep by 9:30 p.m. The next morning, I woke up sore, tired, and regretting pushing myself so hard. I had 13 miles ahead on easier land, but I wasn't sure I could finish in time. I wanted to camp near Sugarloaf Mountain Campground because it had some comforts I needed by then. The 20 miles from the day before had nearly killed me, so the third day's distance was intimidating. Hiking through the open desert near the lake was tiring but easy since the trail was clear. In the afternoon, as I climbed into the hills, the trail got harder to follow through patches of forest. At one point, I left the path briefly to take a break. When I got back, I thought I was on the same trail, but after 10 to 15 minutes, the trail opened into a dirt road that led away from the PCT toward a place called Redwood Heights. I decided to stop, drink some water, and check my map to make sure I was back on the right trail. I thought I was alone, but then a man's voice startled me. He said, "Hello," cheerfully. When he saw I was surprised, he laughed and apologized. He was a short, tan man wearing a vest, shorts, sandals, and a sandy-colored hat. He introduced himself as Alan and said he lived nearby, closer to the highway. He told me he often ran into hikers while walking the hills during his afternoon strolls. He kindly offered to walk me back to the trail and show me the way to Sugarloaf Campground. Alan was warm and friendly, so I agreed. As we walked slowly back, we talked about why I was hiking. He thought it was great that a book had inspired me to go on a real adventure. He shared how, when he was younger, he'd wanted to take a cross-country road trip after reading Jack's Journey. He also told me that the section of the trail I'd chosen was a good choice for beginners, challenging but manageable, and said I should be proud of how far I'd come without giving up. That praise meant a lot to me, and Alan still holds a special place in my heart because of it. But I'm sorry to say, my memories of Alan are a little shadowed by a warning he gave me, which I'm now very grateful for. The memory of him and what happened next on my trip are strangely tied together. Alan said the wilderness between Black Mountain and Sugarloaf Mountain was some of the wildest land in the country. It was officially state land, so no one except park rangers could build homes there. But he said that unofficially, the hills north of the Sierra were home to a very unusual, outgoing man named Old Ben. Alan said Old Ben was a hermit who'd lived there as long as anyone could remember. Though eccentric and reclusive, he was harmless and had never hurt anyone. I don't remember Alan's exact words, but when he added that Old Ben had never hurt anyone, it put me on edge. That's a heavy thing to say, why mention it at all? I asked Alan what he meant by eccentric, if he felt the need to add such a serious reassurance. He said it was a long, complicated story, not worth telling since I probably wouldn't run into Old Ben anyway. But if I did, I could be sure he wasn't dangerous. That didn't make me feel better. At the same time, I wasn't unprotected. Getting a permit to carry a concealed weapon on California's PCT is complicated, but I researched the laws carefully. I applied through the sheriff's office, submitted proof of residency and photos, completed firearms training, passed a live fire test, and waited for the background check. Then I learned about the specific rules for carrying weapons on the PCT. On the advice of a local shop owner, I bought a Sig Sauer P365, which has been with me on every hike since. I knew how to use it, so I wasn't too scared of meeting a strange old hermit, no matter how weird he was. But I was still cautious. After parting ways with Alan, I kept my head on a swivel as I climbed into the pine-covered hills. I moved quickly during the second half of the day, and when I started seeing signs for Sugarloaf, I planned to rest and drink water. Water was what really broke down the spiritual barrier for me, the feeling of being alive in the wilderness. Taking a sip of cold water after hours of hiking in the sun was almost a religious moment. Unlike many things that lose their joy over time, drinking water after a dusty hike only felt better with every mile. As I stopped to rest and enjoy the quiet of one of the last untouched wilderness areas, I noticed him about 50 yards away, off the trail, stepping slowly out from behind a tree. He wore camo clothes, muddy browns and greens, and had long, filthy hair and a bushy beard, so thick that there was hardly a face to see, just a small grimy triangle beneath all the hair covering his eyes. I knew immediately who he was, because he stood perfectly still and stared right at me. He knew I saw him and it didn't bother him. It was Old Ben without a doubt. Even though I was terrified, I raised a hand and waved. Old Ben watched my awkward wave carefully. Then after a minute, he raised his arm and returned it in a crude, mimicked way. I couldn't tell if he was mocking me or just trying to return the gesture. Either way, I wasn't offended. I was too nervous to know what else to do but try to talk. I called out, "You're Old Ben, right?" He didn't answer at first, but then he shifted and yelled back, You're Old Ben, right?" Mimicking my words exactly. It wasn't mean, but it was creepy, like he'd forgotten how to speak properly and was just copying the sounds I made. He wasn't aggressive or moving closer, just mimicked everything I said while staring at me through his grimy hair curtain. When I stood up, put away my water and said, "I'm going now, okay?" He waited until my back was turned, then squeaked out the same phrase in a strange voice. Startled me, but I wasn't surprised. I gave him one last wave and didn't look back as I walked away, but I kept glancing over my shoulder. After a short distance, I stopped, took out my Sig, checked it, loaded it, and felt a little safer. Alan had said Old Ben wasn't dangerous, but after that encounter, I understood why people felt uneasy around him. His behavior made my skin crawl. Maybe if you knew him, it wouldn't feel so strange. But I was firmly in the I don't want to meet you camp, with my cig in my pack and my eyes always